Bonjour à tous, c'est un vrai plaisir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's a real pleasure to be with you here in this beautiful city of Aix-en-Provence. My name is Marie VISOT. I'll be moderating this a session that is bound to be fascinating because for the next hour, we are going to talk about something that has been a major disruption in our perception of companies. Our topic is companies, in as much as they are essential, can be essential to the welfare of our societies. But companies, businesses, are at the crossroads of diverse and sometimes divergent interests. Because companies are no longer where capital and labor meet, but it does affect societies and society as a whole. The business world finds itself in a bit of a vice, caught in between French enterprise and mission, it's a legal framework, mission-led businesses, and Friedman-style companies. So is it the role of companies to work towards the welfare of society as a whole? Many questions that, of course, it is difficult to answer to. It raises questions about governance, about the values defended by companies to make these companies a force for good and for public good. We've talked about the commons and common good ever since this morning. To discuss this topic, we have three representatives from the insurance sector. We have Nicolas GOMART, who's the deputy head of the Matmut group, Olivier JAILLON, who's the CEO of HOANG, what I would call Neo Insurance. We have Hong Wang, who is the founder and executive director of Change NGO, Bertrand DUMAZY, who's the CEO of Edenred, and Stéphane DEDEYAN from CNP Insurance. And it will be our privilege to have with us Bertrand JACQUILLAT, who's the deputy head of Le Cercle des Économistes. But let me emphasize that this is also a conversation that we want to have with you, so feel free to get your questions ready. Bertrand, over to you. Yes, hello, can you hear me? Well, you're probably aware, as you read the program of this conference, that there were many topics that are interconnected with our topic today. Yesterday, there was a session about socially responsible companies. Tomorrow, we'll talk about impact-led finance. This is a topic about mission-led businesses, so this all is pretty much interconnected. And yesterday there was a session moderated by my colleague Pierre Lequesse from Le Cercle, and he led, an attack was led against Milton Friedman, former Stanford professor, and he had just retired when I was in Stanford. And on the 13th of September 1970, he wrote an article in the Financial Times saying, laying out that the corporate social responsibility of a company is first and foremost to make profit. I would like to speak in the defense of Milton Friedman because I think it was misunderstood, and then because it will really be an opportunity for my co-panelists to seize upon to fight against these truisms or misconceptions. So maybe we need to add a caveat to what he said, thinking of the legal framework and regulations. Secondly, he spoke against a practice that was widely spread amongst many American businesses in the 70s, which was a sort of managerial capitalism where each business had a charity or a foundation, and Milton Friedman objected, instead of giving all that money to your foundations or charities, why don't you give more money to your shareholders so that they can make bigger contributions to the causes they believe in? Because it is not for businesses to do that. This notion of profit is highly reductive and simplistic. What Milton Friedman meant is that we have to look at shareholders' value and value for shareholders. This is a very sort of all-encapsulating, all-encompassing notion that would include the question of mission-led businesses, raison d'être, to create value for shareholders. What do we mean by that? We have to leave behind the idea that stock markets only, hail value created in the short term. That's not what value is about. Value is created also in the long term for the sustainability of a company. And to create long-standing value, you have to look at the expectations of younger generations, which have to do with social change, societal changes. To create value for one's shareholders, you have to actually do what's right for your employees, for your customers, and I wrap up with that. If you read the book by Hubert Joly that I often have my students read, he had his whole career in the US, and he turned completely around a company that was near bankruptcy. And in that book, published by Harvard University Press, and that has now been translated, it's entitled Companies at the Heart of Business. He demonstrates that he was able to turn around that business because he prioritized looking after their employees. Esplace was, for French speakers, sort of a mix between Darty and Fnac, so department stores. So I think corporate social responsibility goes hand in hand with value created for shareholders. Okay, thank you, Bertrand. Maybe I'd like to hear the co-panelists on the almost philosophical underlying question. Is it, should it be up to businesses to care for common good? Should it be their #1 priority? So I suppose that same as everybody else, Stéphane DEDEYAN, you defend corporate social responsibility, but you say that first and foremost, businesses need to be viable. Well, sorry for not being provocative or not objecting to anything here, but I pretty much agree with what's just been said. Businesses are faced with a contradictory injunction because it's a fairly robust collective entity, and that was confirmed during COVID. And collectives tend to be weakened in current context, but it has to get to grips with a highly individualized society and all that comes with it. So maybe to decontextualize this topic, if I come back to Socotec. Socotec is a company that has grown and developed very quickly. My first and foremost role when I took it over was to define a strategy to really flesh it out and make it attractive. And for that to happen, you have to make sure that you fit in your time. And I had to recruit engineers, and how could I recruit many engineers? if I'm incapable of saying anything, of having views on the social environment that my business is supposed to operate in. What I mean to say is that you can't have a high-performing business that focuses solely on its performance if the world around you is not faring very well. You have to make a contribution, a humble contribution to some form of common good. But I'll come back to what I started off with. Performance has to remain high on the agenda, and I concur with what's been said. Creating value for shareholders includes both short-term and long-term value creation. We shouldn't pit one against the other, because we are all aware that businesses have to look at their externalities, but also shed some light on the way they contribute to the common good, bearing in mind that what's maybe characteristic of our times is that post-COVID there is a form of consensus that the common good is notably to engineer green transition as quickly as possible. Nobody could oppose that. So in my case, this is scrutinized, and first and foremost by the young engineers and technicians I want to recruit. Nicolas GOMART, just off-the-cuff comment. The role of mission-led businesses is also political, isn't it? Yes, absolutely. Looking at this session's topic, I wondered, and I asked myself the following question. Businesses are supposed to be apolitical, so how come they would be they should be expected to make some form of commitment that would be highly political? So, of course, Socotec, at Socotec, because we have a mutualistic side to our activity, the common good has been high on our agenda for a long time. In the 1980s, there's been a liberal emphasis. Globalization, ease of trade, emerging economies such as China, emerging digital giants as a form of oligarchy. And by the same token, there was a loss of purpose and a fear by a part of the population to lose in social status, and a growing distrust for the elite, and a weakening of our form of parliamentary democracy. So this happened to the detriment of the proponents of the common good and to the benefit of some stakeholders that actually only indirectly benefited from it. So there's talk about a potential algocracy. Algocracy is power given to algorithms. That's first point. As these democratic systems weakened, they increasingly delegated the defense of common good to private stakeholders through regulation. Regulation is really one of our top priorities. You have to make sure that stakeholders can assume their responsibilities to the insurance holders. But then it was broadened to anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing. And new regulations were imposed, which was a framework to combat climate change, taxonomy, and also other new regulations with the transparency and the CSRD directive. And so, buoyed by regulation, they embraced that mission to work for the common good. So there are two models. One that is close to American model, which is of private algocracy, and another, an alternative model of over-regulation, regulation being seen as the be-all and end-all of the pursuit of common good. Personally, I think, and that is part of the commitments we need to make, we have to break that dilemma or that catch-22. We have to find a modus operandi that will leave room to regulation, because make room for regulation because it is essential, but also gives some room for maneuver to private stakeholders, that so that as part of public-private partnerships we can escape this very nefarious situation where we are being driven by not very democratic constraints and avoid the risks of a private algocracy. And I wrap up with an example. Apologies for being a bit long. The question of data. If we really want to develop a preventative policy in France, we absolutely need healthcare, the healthcare sector, to build a national system for the protection of health data. The Data Protection Agency, NIL, encourages making the most of this system. In the system I wish for, we have to find the right terms and conditions for this shared modus operandi between public authorities and private businesses to further common good. Okay, I believe, Olivier JAILLON, you go even one step further in your reflection. Hervé MONTJOTIN has talked of a sort of virtuous circle, but you consider that this framework is no longer needed. I'm saying that this idea of mission-led businesses is not, I wouldn't say not necessary at all, but it's certainly not sufficient. So 65% of GDP is, accounted for by the private sector. So the private sector has, if you will, a financial firepower that is way bigger than the public sector. But it behoves on the private sector to be fully engaged in working towards the welfare of our fellow citizens. I like to take a hands-on approach, so I'll give examples. We have to fight inflation, which is a real scourge, you know, for French population and in other countries. So 15 cents reduction on energy prices, supplemented by a 10 cent reduction from the private sector, makes it pretty clear that the public sector can't do it alone. During COVID, trying to make it possible for number of shop owners and to keep going, whereas insurance companies, we made sure that they could keep their businesses afloat. I could give other examples that are more the stuff of dreams. If we talk about space conquest, NASA was losing steam, and had there not been private initiatives such as Elon Musk's SpaceX, maybe things would have gone in a rut. How can we make for a better connection between these two sectors so as to improve the welfare of our fellow citizens. I think the problem is probably to decide how we want to distribute wealth. How do we intend to really prompt businesses to participate in that redistribution? Through tax. I'm not saying that governments are failing, but they can't know in all its granularity where exactly each individual needs support for their welfare. And I think with those mission-led businesses, we took one step forward. The legal frame is pretty detailed. There's an infectio societatis, which is geared towards profit and profit-making. And we decide that businesses have to put it in their articles of association how they intend to have an impact on the welfare of your fellow citizens. That includes your employees and your customers. And I think that legal framework is a great tool, and it includes a DNA that actually focuses on the defense of the welfare of people. And I think we need to create an emulation and vis-a-vis other countries, and defend the idea that businesses have to include it in the Articles of Association how they intend to redistribute wealth. Well, raison d'être, business, mission-led businesses, this is spreading. Well, Ms. Hong Huang, you represent an NGO. From your perspective, your viewpoint, do you think that the role of businesses has changed, or that there's been a will for change since COVID?
I hope I understood everyone here perfectly through the translation. Thank you for the question. And I have to tell you that I was very surprised, like why an NGO person from Vietnam invited to this event full of business people. I don't know, maybe I have different perspectives, but maybe we share the same views. We just do it differently. Back to your questions, I have been in NGO for 20 years, and believe me, for decades, I used to think that corporations are evil, you know, like, oh, they're so bad. They created climate change, they pollute the air, they do everything bad, and we non-profit have to work hard to save the planet. But it took years later then I realized that, hey, everyone has a mission. And businesses, yes, businesses have to make profit. It's their mission. And sometimes we think that our mission is more important than the other ones. But when I become older, I realize that no, we just have to talk the other one's language to really include them in the movement that I'm trying to build. And that's why I decided to start working with the corporations, with this private sector. And I have to tell you that it's so difficult, like really understanding what the business people think is really challenging, because I never done any economic work in my life. So, but I realized how it has evolved over the years. I mean, like 10 years ago, I started to work with some, big companies, and all they could do to help us is to like give us some money to run our event, planting some trees, and later on they would move to like, hey, how can you do a green office for our companies? And then later on they started to talk about SDGs, and they started to talk about CSR, just because of the peer pressure from the other international companies that they work with, and the sense of competition, like, hey, I have to compete with the other ones, so I have to do with CSR. And now I think the business, I have to admit that I see how business leaders right now are so much more aware, much better aware than, let's say, 10 years ago. Because I think, because they see it, like climate change, COVID-19, they affect them. They affect the economy. They affect the businesses. So I saw the recent report on LinkedIn, I think, about 96% of all the largest companies by revenue are already reporting on sustainability in their annual report, like a normal thing, like anyone have to do sustainability. And so the sustainability right now doing by the companies have gone beyond planting some trees or giving money to some small projects, but it has gone to like really doing some real impacts. And I think that is what matters, because it's not about you saving some paper from not printing the email or you know, like some simple work. Now I see banks who have stopped lending money to fossil fuel projects, or the big companies are doing a lot bigger ESG programs. And I think that is what is needed for the community, because not because the community needs this support, but also because the companies see that this is what they have to do for them to survive. Because if COVID-19 hit everyone, climate change is hitting everyone, I think business leaders right now, they are so smart and they see that they have to go sustainable so they can survive in the future.
Thank you very much. Alors Bertrand DUMAZY, vous aussi vous...
So you're going to say also that, in your opinion, companies have a social, environmental, economic role, but you're introducing a small nuance. We actually were discussing about this when we did the briefing before the session. You certainly summed it up much better. You're saying that there are essential companies, some are not, but we have to reflect upon our role over the long term. Is that it, Bertrand? Yes, first of all, I would like to follow up on the wonderful energy, to surf on the wonderful energy from my neighbor. I looked up in the Larousse dictionary to see what well-being was. It's actually two things. It's a pleasant social status, and it's also material well-being. So do companies actually contribute to the material well-being, but also to a social pleasantness? What does it mean when we say pleasant social state? Well, it was actually explained by Philippe Val in the previous session. The aging of population, individualization and digitization actually create silos from a social point of view. When we say that the people that say that have been affected by solitude actually has exploded. We go from 10 to 14%. Among the young, we go from 2 to 15%. That means that we feel alone, much more alone now in the society. And I think companies are the solution, because it's a collective adventure. This is where we weave bonds with the previous generation in a region, in a country, and also at the international stage. So companies contribute to the social welfare. And something else that is quite important as well is that we should actually accomplish ourselves. I've been working for the same company for many years. For Danred, actually, it's even better, but it's amazing because we can actually blossom. How can we blossom individually? Well, I'm going to read a CNAM professor quote. He says that individuals have lost their roots when they show that they haven't made a contribution to society. We all feel that when we work for a company, we actually have an input to a common project. This contribution allows us to blossom, to feel better, and to have social links in a society that is destructuring itself and that is dissolving itself. I think that we shouldn't forget it. The company contributes to the well-being in the society. There's something else as well, is the economic well-being. We said we were talking about material welfare. I hope that I'm not stating the obvious here, but Before distributing money, we have to produce money and we have to work on it collectively, and then the surplus will actually generate profit, and that will be redistributed and create welfare and well-being. Well, there are also, what about the climatic change? Some companies pollute because they have never thought about decarbonation, but I am the director of two wonderful companies, Air Liquide on the one hand, Neoen on the other hand, and I can see Mr. Barbaro, who's the boss of this company as well, and I can see that these companies are wonderful. They're full of talents, and they are thinking about decarbonation on an everyday basis. And there's more green energy thanks to solar, thanks to wind energy, thanks to Benoît Cotier, because he's actually thinking about this every day. He's thinking about how to decarbonate economy. There are wonderful things that are being done right now. And if we work on it all together, our collective and individual intelligence will certainly enable us to overcome the difficulties which we face. So yes, companies do contribute to the well-being of the society. They have a lot of power, actually. And if we think about the accumulated turnover of Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, and then actually it's a GDP of Spain. In a nutshell, it's actually the GDP of Russia. That's what we're talking about. And when we were talking about this, I can actually realize the big power that we have from a financial point of view, from a data point of view. We create data every day, every week. And the question that is being raised is, with this power, since we can actually contribute to the well-being of society, how are we going to use this power? And this is where I actually revert back to what was said in the introduction. As was said before the meeting, probably we can do even better. And I think that will be the meaning of your second question. Thank you very much. It's very hard to speak last because a lot has been said earlier. But in a few words, we're going to listen to you when we're talking about the common good economy. Has it actually made way into your heart? Can you say something about it? Indeed, this was an eye-opener for me, because the question that we are asking ourselves is how can we match the specific interest and the general interest? And what Jean Tirole is saying is that he's giving actually a manual. He's actually inducing us as business leaders to have a broad meaning of how we can insert ourselves in the ecosystem. But he's pushing the reasoning further and say that we should actually think about it in a more specific manner, in a more systemic manner, in a more systematic manner, around a simple idea, a straightforward idea, namely, we should identify those positive externalities and negative externalities and try to do our utmost to stimulate ourselves to internalize the negative externalities. The first thing is polluting, paying concept, then the carbon tax, the carbon tax as well. That showed me actually my individual responsibility. I don't want to wait for the state to intervene, to know that I can have a large acceptance of what the company's responsibility is. We have decided with Philippine in the Banque Postale group to have an internal price of carbon, to give an internal price to carbon. So in this way, we can actually internalize a negative externality, and we can be more rigorous because we'll have a self-constraint in a way. And also, to talk about the raison d'être of CNP Assurance, we have listed all our stakeholders. We have identified 6 of them, 6 partners, clients, shareholders, companies, planet. And we've told ourselves what is our usefulness with each of these stakeholders. We formalized a commitment with regards to each of them with 3 objectives. So we have 18 objectives. We have 21 KPIs that have been determined around that. And we'll have a strategic roadmap for this to embody this roadmap. And we try to do so around all these KPIs. We were very much inspired by what Mr. Tirole said, with this vision that is really rigorous, systematic vision to know actually what is it to be a company that tries to combine the specific individual interest with the general interest. And we try to structure down to really see exactly what all the stakeholders are and how we can do something about it. Yeah, this is exactly the theory that we tried to determine earlier. And it has actually a practical implementation on a daily basis. This is exactly what we're going to mention in the end. Olivier JAILLON, if you were to give me an example of what you're doing on a daily basis for the well-being of the society as an insurance company, I can mention two things. First, I will mention what a neo-insurer is. We'll try to design products for all the new uses. I will not hide the fact that there's a huge change of paradigm over the last years between the ownership that goes towards use. When we throw away, for instance, when we throw away scooters in the street, we manage to see that we can insure them to make sure that you can use them. That was the same thing for different platforms with Amazon, Uber, for instance, Uber. And that allows each and every one of us to benefit from these new uses, because there was a huge change of paradigm for us insurance companies, because we were used to analyze the data of the past to prejudge of the future. And we have no data. So we have to try to foresee the future with a new paradigm, and you have to be able to use these new mobility transport means, for instance. That's part and parcel of our society. Another aspect is that within WACAN, we have decided to opt for a mission statement to become a mission-driven company, that is to see the involvement of the private sphere within for the public good. And we have an endowment fund where we collected we levy a few cents per euro in all the countries where we are present in Europe. And by taking away these cents, then we actually allocate it to the endowment fund, and we manage to fund non-profit activities a bit everywhere in Europe. So this is what we do. We use our trade as an insurance company to create well-being. And I would like to wrap up with something that was very interesting in the definition of well-being that you gave. We feel well-being when we feel involved, where we have an input. And that's very important, because beyond the material side, we want to feel useful within our company. We want to wake up in the morning and think, okay, I'm useful for something. And this is why we set up a lot of democratic processes in the company. I will just mention one. On Tuesday morning, when we talk about new business opportunities, new partnership opportunities, the whole company will vote on these to know whether this opportunity is attractive, if it's worth studying or not. And I have no veto right. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. You've said it rapidly. You are heading a mutual insurance company, something that could be seen as a bit old earlier, but it actually has evolved into a citizen movement. What do you think about this? Is it the pressure from citizens that make companies evolve, or is it the other way around? I would like to make a remark about the fact that we are actually outdated. I think that was not very nice. I'm sorry about that. But I would say that at first we built our company around a Uberization logic of the company. And now we have found a strong positive feedback from the young generation, from the society, thanks to the characteristics, the specific features of redistributing resources that we know well. To answer to your question, who's giving the impetus? Is it the citizens or the corporations? Well, we were in a spontaneous approach from the beginning, and we tried to reflect upon what allowed us to pool resources in a logic that would be trying to pull everything together of a solidarity. So we actually have the capacity to have some impetus, but we need to go beyond the generation and a specific environment. I think we can actually be a driver on ourselves. As for a mission-driven company, we decided not to have the status because, in a way, we were already there. It's not new. Okay, I understand. What we know most from your work, is actually the menu, the digital menu that you created. How about other internal activities? Because what about wages and earnings? Because it's not enough anymore for an employee's well-being. They need more. Yes. I would like to mention 2 examples to answer to your question. With NRED, the question is not to know whether we're prosperous or wealthy or if we master cutting-edge technologies, but for whom? For which use? Who's going to benefit from it? And I will give you 2 examples from the previous weeks, actually. And each week we have actually a new outcome. In Africa, in a country called Cameroon, we were contacted by the state saying that subsidies are coming to help farmers to produce better. However, we do not know whether these subsidies arrive to the farmers and how they are used. You are the world champion of tracking money. That means that there's digital money going onto a mobile phone, and it can be only spent for the use that was originally intended. So we've created a program for 600,000 farmers. They receive their subsidies on their mobile phone, and they could spend it only to buy insurance, namely for anything that is useful for farming. We were also contacted by Romania. We were told that there are 600,000 pensioners coming from the Ceausescu era, and they said we want to help them because of the crisis coming ahead. We know that these elderly are malnourished. We don't want to give them money because we know that it could be kept for savings and would not be used to feed themselves. How can we actually send money on a mobile phone and to make sure that this Edelrate Romania money could be used only to buy food? We said, yes, we know how to do it. We'll work and day to do it, night and day to do it. And generally, these are ladies that are 83 years old. We want to be useful for them. There's just one difficulty, is that at 83 years old, access to the digital world will be difficult. But on the first day, we had 30,000 people who actually had access to it. And with this tracking of money at the service of the population or wage earners, we have that every week. And we know that we are prosperous, we know that we control the technology, but the real question is how can we be even more useful? Thank you. Hervé MONTJOTIN. You're working on the sustainability of buildings. This actually answers, this is a response to a concern from the population. How about greenwashing? Do we still have greenwashing in your sector? The mic doesn't work. Thank you. We are the service of sustainability of infrastructures and everything that is built. We have this in our DNA from scratch, from the beginning. This is our raison d'être. And it is actually an important asset, because our activity has been meaningful from the start. When we talk about sustainability, we actually put other terms, other meanings into that than what we put in the 50s. As for the greenwashing in the construction sector, where you have 25, which generates 25 to 35% of greenhouse gas, it's difficult to measure that. But what hits me, it's that on one hand, everything that is related to the measurement of negative externalities and their internalization and their possible internalization, there is a retightening of everything that enables us to measure them. There will always be people that will try to circumvent all this, but less and less, because there will be less and less leeway for this. And we can't be as superficial as we were earlier. In our company, in terms of externalities, it's quite limited, because we are talking about engineers, technicians, and cars, so it's not that complex to solve. But as for our contribution to environmental and energy transition in the sector of construction and infrastructures, which gives us an opportunity to give meaning to what we're doing beyond the technical contribution, we decided to move on that and to reflect upon what we're doing every day on a daily basis. We've done it, and it is a daunting task, and we've been working on the European Taxonomy. This is actually being set up little by little, and we can see that there's some space for the European soft power that is quite powerful, actually, which is actually try to agree with each other, with one another on taxonomy, and that actually contributes to, in everything that contributes to the energy transition. I think this is a major stake for corporations. So, in a word, to your name, how are you socially useful on a daily basis? I think insurance is very useful per se. This is why I'm actually very passionate about my job. When you walk around here, what do we hear? We hear all the threats about the common goods, the pandemic, the national disaster, climate change, the cyber risks. All these are risks, and it's actually raw material for my trade. But, you know, it's so intense, and it's so sudden and so violent that it's actually more and more difficult to insure these risks. And when we talk about foreseeability, then we have an added problem. So, how do I perceive my role? We have to push back the limits of what is being assurable and what is not. When we talk about liabilities and assets, everything, that's the pooling of resources. Everybody pays a little bit, and when you have a shock, we take their money, and we take a lot of money from the others to compensate that. As for businesses that look into only their specific interest, what do? We exclude risk, we segment risks. If we want to push back the limits of what is being insurable, we have to wonder how can we be even more inclusive in terms of insurance? Because if we pool a wide basin of insured people, then it will cost less for the people. So we have to think about it through and through, rethink about it through and through, and try to do something in those lines. We have to suppress all the subprimes for the aggravated risk of health, because we have a pooling of resources, and this is a common good. When you pay the premiums, you don't pay for the insurance claim straight away. So we invest money. CNP is 400 billion investment, 45 billions that are coming into renewal every year. What do we do with these 45 billions? First, we exclude projects on fossil fuels, on fossil energy, because there's too many of them, and we are actually burning the planet. And then we will channel our money towards what is stimulating creativity around renewable energies. And we try to do that rigorously. We work on all the paths of decarbonation in our portfolio, and we have an SBTi certification to make sure that what we're doing is not greenwashing, so we're changing our software. Okay, you've understood. So, we have no time left, but I would like to give the last word to our friend Hong. There's a question that I would like to ask her. What is the role of the citizen in all these changes? How can it give impetus towards these new functions of the company for the common good? What do you think about this, Hong?
It's so hot today, right? And Europe just went through, I think, one of the worst summer recently, right? And I think many other countries and many parts of the world just had records heat this year. And scientists still saying that this probably is still the coolest summer ever from now here until the next few decades, because climate change will not stop. It will be hotter and hotter. So I think it's time we all have to work together, because no one single organization or entity can solve this climate change or even COVID-19, like all these crazy crises that the global is facing. And I'm saying that companies are doing great job, like, for the well-being of the society, but I think it is time we have to do it better. We have to do it like more long-term, and we have to do it more seriously. I mean, one company doing like buying carbon credits somewhere in the Madagascar, but at the same time they still haven't changed anything in the supply chain. That would not work, because we will pay the price one decade or 2 decades later, not now, but it will happen. So it's time, like, everyone has to take it seriously, and again, we have to work together. And one more thing, doing this good, not just for the good for the society, it's good for the business, because think about all the Gen Z who will be your customers in the future, and they are super aware, and they are the one who changed the world, and we have to work with them. So work with the CSO, work with the youth community, work with the community, and hope we will have a brighter future. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'on a le temps pour les questions?
Do we have time for questions, or no? So sorry, no Q&A anymore. Thank you to all of you for this participation. We'll have other wonderful sessions, and have a wonderful end of day. Thank you.